Good morning, all, and welcome back to our Shaalos Uteshuvos shir on Sunday morning. We're now into the month of Adar, and Chazal tell us, Mishenichas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. When the month of Adar begins, we have to increase in our Simcha. And the Rebbe explains in the Sikha of Tafshin Nun Beis that this refers to any form of Simcha, whatever brings us joy, we should increase in. But it starts with, and the primary joy is, as it says in the Pasuk, Kudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamchei Leiv, that Kudim, the laws of Hashem, which refers to the mitzvahs, refers to Torah, are Yesharim, are upright, and Mesamchei Leiv, they rejoice the heart, that the ultimate and highest form of joy that we can experience is through the study of Torah. And even though now in Melbourne here we are in a lockdown once again, nonetheless, we still have the opportunity and ability to learn Torah under every circumstance, and therefore we can have that joy. So we are in the middle of a tshuva from Yechavadas, from Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef, describing and explaining the halachas of Purim as it relates to Yerushalaim in such a kvius, where Purim falls out on Friday, Shushan Purim is on Shabbos, and therefore we have what is referred to as Purim Meshulash, a threefold Purim, because the mitzvos of Purim are spread over 3 days. We began last week and we discussed the first few points. Number one, the reading of Megillah is not done on Shabbos. That is because of Gezeira D'Rabbah, that a person may come to carry the Megillah. And therefore, even in Yerushalaim, Megillah is read on Friday, the 14th of Adar, just like the rest of the Jewish world. And that was point number one. Point number two, we then said, okay, so we are continuing on with our tshuva from Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef, which we'll bring up on the screen. And we're talking about Purim in such a kvius, where in Yerushalaim, the mitzvahs of Purim are observed over 3 days in what is referred to colloquially as Purim Meshulash, a threefold Purim. Just a run through of the halachas that we've covered so far is that the Megillah is not read on Shabbos, even though that is the 15th of Adar, which is the appropriate day for reading the Megillah. And that is because of the Gezeira of Rabbah, that a person, the Chazal were worried a person may come to carry the Megillah, and therefore they read the Megillah earlier on the 14th of Adar, which is a Friday, like everybody else. We then saw a discussion that, is this considered reading Shaloi Bizmana? That the Gemara says that in those places, for example, villagers who would come in earlier and would read the Megillah on the 11th or the 12th or the 13th of Adar, under those circumstances, they must have a minyan present. So too in this kvius, when the people from the walled cities who should be reading on the 15th, which is Shabbos, but instead are reading early on the 14th, is that considered reading Shaloi Bizmana, not in its time? And therefore, do they require a minyan? And we said that lechatchila, they should have a minyan present. However, b'di'evet, if that's not possible, they still read the Megillah with all of the brachas based on a number of factors. Number one, that even the Gemara, according to some Rishonim, is only saying lechatchila, they should have a minyan, but b'di'evet it's okay. Furthermore, in such a situation, that is only referring to those who read on the 11th, 12th, or the 13th of Adar. But when you read the Megillah on the 14th, even though it is early for these walled cities, nonetheless, that is not considered reading early, and therefore they are able to read with a bracha. We then said that the matanas le'evyonim, the mitzvah of giving gifts to the poor, is also observed on the 14th of Friday, which is when they would read the Megillah. And that is because, as the Gemara says, the teaching of Rabbi Yosef is that the eyes of the poor are waiting for the Megillah reading. That it was customary that the Matanas Evyonim was given out at the time of the Megillah reading. And when people are already enthused and excited and in a joyous state from reading about the miracle, they're more generous. And therefore, the Matanas Evyonim goes hand in hand with the Megillah. Just as the Megillah is read on Thursday night and Friday in Yerushalaim, so too Matanas Evyonim is observed over there. Now, what we then spoke about not doing malacha, that there is a minhag of not doing malacha on Purim, and our sages tell us that one does not see a sign of bracha from any work that they do on Purim. And the question is, for those in Yerushalaim who their Purim is really on Shabbos, the 15th of Adar, but they are doing it early, they're reading Megillah early, does that prohibition of doing malacha, doing work activities apply? And the consensus is that it does not. However, there is a hidur, there's room to be stringent. And then the final thing we discussed last week was the reciting of Al Hanisim. We add the Al Hanisim into benching and davening on Purim. And normally, they say that in Yerushalaim on the 15th of Adar, which is their Purim. Here they're reading the Megillah early on the 14th, and the question is, do they say Al Hanisim on Shabbos? To add further, we're going to see today that the Purim Suda in Yerushalaim is observed on Sunday, which is the 16th of Adar. And if the Purim Suda is on the 16th of Adar, and therefore the Shabbos meals are not really Purim meals, do they need to say Al Hanisim there as well? And the conclusion is that Al Hanisim is recited on Shabbos in Yerushalaim, both in the tefillos of davening, all of the davening tefillos, as well as the sudas of Shabbos as well. We're now going to pick up inside from Ois Vav, from point 6, and that is as follows. The Shabbos Shutes Vav Ba'adar B'Yerushalayim Moitzim Shnei Sifrei Torah. So there is a special Kriyas Torah for Purim, which is from Parashas Shalach by Yavai Amalek, that talk. So we will lay that in Chutz Haaretz or in outside of the walled cities on Purim itself. We lay the reading of Yavai Amalek. And in Yerushalaim, where their real Purim is the 15th of Adar, and it's only because of circumstance that they read Megillah earlier, on Shabbos they read the Purim Laning. So they will take out 2 Sifrei Torah, and they will read the Parshas HaShavua in the first one. Parshas HaShavua, V'omer Kaddish. After they finish Kriyas Torah of the Parsha, they will say Kaddish. And then Koire HaMaftir B'Sefer Sheni, they read the Maftir in the second Sefer Torah, and that is Parshas Vayavai Amalek Atzoifa, the Parsha Vayavai Amalek, which is the laning of Purim. There's no need to repeat the last pasuk now, which is interesting. We some places have a custom of repeating the last pasuk on Purim, and that is because the whole Parsha Vayavai Amalek has less than 9 psukim. And each aliyah has to have a minimum of, it only has 9 psukim in total, and we're supposed to lay a minimum of 10 psukim at any given time. And but nonetheless, they don't need to add over here because it's coming in context of the parsha of Shabbos as well, where they're reading many, many more. So therefore, there's no need in such a case to repeat the last pasuk. But Omer Kaddish Umaftir, and then for the Haftorah, unlike us on Shabbos, we will read our regular Haftorah of the week. They read a Purim Haftorah, and that is Pokadati Es Asher Asa Amalek Kaftaras Shabbos Zachar. It is the Haftorah of Shaul, who was commanded to go and fight against Amalek, which is the Haftorah which is read on Shabbos Zachar. So we read that on Shabbos Zachar, the Shabbos before Purim, and they too will read this on Shabbos Zachar, which is the Shabbos before Purim as well. Nonetheless, this Haftorah is repeated again as the Haftorah of Purim Day itself in Yerushalaim. But in other cities in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz Haaretz, where they are not walled cities, they take out 1 Sefer Torah, but current Parshas HaShavua read only the Parsha of the week. Maftirin Gamkein Haftarah HaShavua, and the Haftarah is the regular Haftarah of the week. So, just to jump down into the footnotes where he explains the basis of these rulings. So he explains as follows. This idea that we read that in Yerushalaim, they will repeat the Haftarah of Shabbos Zachar, they repeat that on Purim Day itself as the Haftarah, is found in the Shut Maranach, Shemaftirim Pokadati, Afapi Shiftiru Bakfar B'Shabbos HaKodim B'Parshas Zachar, even though they already read this the week before as the Haftarah, and this is the Psak in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Reish Peiches Sif Vav. V'chein Kasvu Rabbeinu Ovadiah Mebartanura B'Radvaz B'Tshuva Chelakei V'chein Kasvu Agoyin Harishon Lutziyim B'Sefer Pri Adama V'Shaloi Kedivrei Arav Bal Tikun Yisachar. And this is unlike the opinion of another rabbi, the Tikun Yisachar Shekasav Sheaftiru B'Haftarahs Parshas HaShavua, who says that no, even in Yerushalaim, because they read the Haftarah of Pakadati of Amalek the week before in Shabbos Zachar. So on this Shabbos, even though for them in Yerushalaim it is Shabbos of Purim itself, they read the regular Haftarah of the week. V'chein B'Sefer Birchas Mayim U'Gdolim Mizu Kasav B'Shut Ema Derech She'afilu Ba'Iris HaMsupakos Im Hayu Mukafos Chomim Mos Yeshuv Benun V'Nagul Lo'Hitzi Shnei Sifrei Torah B'Shnei Hayamim Naftirin Gamkein Pakadati K'Shechal Tesvav Ba'Adar B'Shabbos, which is interesting. Until now, we've really spoken about Yerushalaim. Yerushalaim is a city which it certainly was walled in the times of Yeshua, and therefore they would only observe Purim on the 15th of Adar. cities where there's a doubt, such as Tveria or Tzfas, etc., where there is a doubt whether the city was walled in the times of Yehoshua or not, normally in a regular year we'll observe both days of Purim, the 14th and the 15th. They will read the Megillah on both because of the doubt. Says Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef that there are opinions that say even in this year's Kviyos, where the 15th is in fact Shushan Purim is on Shabbos, these cities where there is a doubt, they too will read the Haftorah of Pakadati of Amalek, even though it's only a doubt. And that is, again, an extension of the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch. So that's with regards to the Kriyas HaTorah and the Haftorah of Shabbos. Then, furthermore, the Shabbos Shu Tesvav Ba'adar on the 15th of Adar. So again, there's no Megillah on Shabbos. There's no Purim Suda on Shabbos. There's no Mishlayach Manos on Shabbos. Nonetheless, Yerushalaim Shoylim V'Doshim B'Rabim B'Inyana Shoyim HaPurim. That in Yerushalaim on that day on Shabbos, the drasha and shiurim should be about the inyanim of Purim. That the discussion should be about Purim. And this is brought from the Rambam as well as in the Gemara in Megillah, that this is what they should do. And this is based on an idea that we find that Moshe Rabbeinu established that on the days of the Yom Tovim, on Pesach, on Shavuos, on Sukkot, etc., we should be doirish, we should speak about the miracles of the day. And so too, because in Yerushalaim, Tesvav Adar is the day of Purim, that is the day they should speak about the miracles as well. Jumping on to Ois Ches, B'Yom HaRishon Shu Tes Zayin Ba'Adar. So now we've finished with Shabbos, now we're fast forwarding to Sunday, which is the third day of the Purim Meshulash. So on the third day, which is the Sunday, the 16th of Adar, Oisim Sudas Purim, that is when the Sudas Purim takes place. Alpia Amab Yerushalaim, and this is based on the teaching in the Talmud Yerushalaim, Perek Aleph, the Megillah Halacha Dalet. Shatam Shein Lasois Sudas Purim B'Shabbos Mishum Shenemar Lasois Oisam Yimei Mishte B'Simcha. So I understand you can't read the Megillah on Shabbos because the rabbis had a concern that people may carry the Megillah. I understand that you can't give Mishloach Manos or Matanos Evyonim necessarily because there are issues of carrying or issues of Muktzah and the like. But why can't we make the Sudas Purim on Shabbos itself? So Yerushalmi says we don't, and that is because the Pasuk says that we should make them as days of Yemei Mishtev V'Simcha. Purim should be celebrated as a time of feasting and Simcha, of joy. Says the Yerushalmi, Eshe Simchasei Tuluya Bebeistin. This refers to that we make them into days of Simcha, into joy, and that refers to a Simcha which is dependent on the Beistin. Yatsa Shabbos, which excludes Shabbos, Simchasei Tuluya B'dei Shamayim, which its Simcha comes B'dei Shamayim from Hashem. Meaning, Shabbos itself, the seventh day of the week, will always be Shabbos. So the Simcha of Shabbos comes from Shamayim, it comes from Hashem, that this day is Shabbos. Whereas the days of the Yom Tovim of the calendar are based on the declaration of the Beis Din, and therefore the observance of any Yom Tov is dependent on them. And so too over here, the days of Simcha have to be ones which are decreed by the Beis Din, not the Simcha which is already there from Shabbos. Furthermore, we know that the Simcha of Shabbos is not something which was a chidush that Mordechai and the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah who established the Yom Tov Purim came and enacted. El halacha keduma b'dei shamayim. It's an halacha which already pre-existed. It's the obligation of having simcha because that's what Hashem says. The Medrash says that what does the days of your rejoicing mean? That is Shabbos. And that's why on Shabbos we say yismachu. You should rejoice. Shomrei Shabbos, those who guard Shabbos and call it a delight. So Shabbos by itself warrants simcha. And the Simcha of Purim has to be an additional Simcha that we add, not one which is already there. And therefore, the Simchas Purim, the Sudas Purim, is observed on the Sunday. Nonetheless, on Shabbos itself, it is still appropriate in Yerushalaim and cities of that nature to add something extra, an extra portion, an extra course, or something on the meals of Purim in honor of Purim as part of the Shabbos meal, and also to drink wine or other types of alcoholic beverages as a remembrance of the miracle which took place as a result of a Suda of Yain itself. So on this point, on this discussion of why the Suda is observed on a Sunday, as we'll see, it's not actually agreed by everybody. If you notice, the source is from the Talmud Yerushalaim. So he says as follows: Hine harif vehilchos halachos perakama de Megillah. Rav Alfasi in his halachos, maybe halacha mashikos Yerushalaim, he brings this Yerushalaim as halacha. Shesudas Purim ma'achrin v'loy makdimin. That in such a kfiyus, when Shushan Purim is on Shabbos, the meal, the festive meal of Purim is pushed off, is delayed to Sunday rather than being done early. So the Megillah is brought early and done on Thursday night, Friday. The Sudas Purim is done later. Because of Ran Azen, the Ran writes, that is referring to our kfiyus when the 15th of Adar is on Shabbos. That the walled cities will read earlier on Erev Shabbos. Nonetheless, Sudas Purim ein oisim oisai ad yom echad. The Shabbos, the Sudas Purim is only done on Sunday. And they ask, interesting question. We know that the days of Purim are the 14th and the 15th of Adar, Purim and Shushan Purim. And it says that these days will not pass by, and that's why we learn that you cannot read the Megillah after the 15th. There are possibilities of reading the Megillah on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th of Adar, but not later because lo ya'avar. So therefore, that implies that the mitzvahs of Purim have to be observed on the 14th or 15th of Adar or earlier. And yet here we're saying that the Sudas Purim, which is one of the essential mitzvahs of the day, is actually pushed off and observed on the 16th of Adar. And that's a question that the Rishonim had on this Yerushalaim, because the Yerushalmi says clearly that the Sudas Purim is pushed off and observed a day later. And based on this question, so the Ra'ah actually explains Sudas Purim ma'achrin hainu livnei kfarim shemakdimim likros hamegillah. That in fact, when the Yerushalmi says that the Sudas Purim is delayed, is pushed later, is not referring to our context at all, but is in fact referring to the villagers who are able to read the Megillah earlier on the 11th, 12th, or 13th of Adar, to tell us that they do not observe the Purim meal on that day itself, that they're reading the Megillah, but they push it off and they will do it on the 14th or the 15th maybe of Adar. But the Ra'ah says that the Simchas Purim, which means the Suda Purim, must be bismana, must be on the 14th or the 15th of Adar, and that's how he interprets the Yerushalmi. So he says, "Ve'eni royesh Yerushalmi yisbo piruzed." The Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef disagrees with this interpretation of the Yerushalmi. Why is that? The Hargar Sinan, because in our version of the text of the Yerushalmi, the Girsa, the version of the text that we have, so it says, "Rabbi Zera Baye Kame Rabbi Abo V'Yasu Oisam B'Shabbos." That they made this meal on Shabbos. So he says it was a question: can you make it on Shabbos? Amalei said to him, and that was the answer of Rabbi Abo to Rabbi Zera, that it says you may mishta v'simcha ksiv as shesimcha tzlui b'beis din. We learn from this that the observance must be a simcha that is made by the beis din. With the exception of Shabbos, where the requirement of simcha of Shabbos is a standalone obligation b'dei shamayim. Kolel, what do we see? Shesimcha Shabbos einim mitakanas Mordechai, that the rejoicing of Shabbos Mordechai shesimchasa b'dei shamayim ulefichach efshar lefarish Yerushalmi kapirish hara'ah, and therefore we cannot interpret the Yerushalmi in the way that the Ra'ah does. Nonetheless, he goes on to discuss this a little bit more, and furthermore, he asks an interesting question: is that generally when we talk about simcha, so simcha is in fact simcha is not observed on Shabbos. The mitzvah of simcha is on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov there is a requirement of having simcha, and that's why we have to have meat, we have to have wine on Yom Tov. But on Shabbos there is no requirement of simcha. So that therefore remains a question. It remains a question as to why the Gemara, the Yerushalmi, says that it's dependent on simcha. On Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of Oinek Shabbos. The mitzvah of Oinek Shabbos is that we have to delight in Shabbos, but not to have simcha. So therefore, why would we exclude the simcha of Purim from being done on Shabbos based on this requirement? So that's another question that he discusses. Nonetheless, The ruling we said was the halacha, the Shulchan Aruch says that we make the Sudas Purim on Shabbos. Nonetheless, we do add something. One should add something on Shabbos itself as a zeicha for Purim, and perhaps that is in deference to those Rishonim, such as there are, who says that the Purim Suda should be observed in its time, even in such a kviyus as well. Okay, continuing on in the footnote, we'll jump down to the next paragraph to the word ulam. Ulam b'shut ma'anach kasav loichiach ma'gemara shalanu b'megillah shechoylek al Yerushalaim. So whereas the Rif and many other Rishonim bring this Yerushalmi lahalacha that the Sudas Purim is observed on Sunday, not on Shabbos, that is based on the assumption that our Talmud, the Talmud Bavli, does not argue with the Yerushalmi, because when there is a machlokes, an argument between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, the halacha follows the Bavli. And therefore, the assumption here is that our Talmud does not address this issue of when to make the Purim Suda in such a case. However, Marnach in his Tshuva writes that in fact our Gemara Bavli does argue with the Yerushalmi, Sham Risham, because our Gemara says as follows: Purim shechaliyos be'erev Shabbos. When Purim is on erev Shabbos, Rav Amar Makdimin Parshas Zachar l'Shabbos shelafanav. That Parshas Zachar is observed the Shabbos preceding. Why? In order that the asiya, the observing, should not precede the zechira. And what does that mean? So the reason we read Parashat Zachar before Purim is because we are remembering what Amalek did to us. And it says in the pasuk, Hayam elin nizkarim v'nasim. These days will be remembered and observed. That the remembrance, which refers to the reading about Amalek in the Torah, has to precede the observing of the Yom Tov of Purim. And therefore, in such a case, when Purim falls out on Erev, when Purim is on Erev Shabbos, so even though the next day of Shabbos is Shushan Purim, and it might be appropriate to read about Amalek then, but because the mitzvahs of Purim are observed on Friday, therefore the Zechira, the remembrance of Amalek, has to be done the preceding Shabbos. Shmuel Amar, but Shmuel says, Ma'achrin, we read it later. Amalach, he says, Kimin de Ikam Mukafin de Abdi B'Chamesar Asiya Uzchira B'Hadi Adalika. Also, when he explains his reason is that because on the Shabbos, which would be the 15th, the walled cities have both the Asiya Uzachira. That's when they read about Amalek as well, and they observe the mitzvahs. They come to we can also read about they're observing the mitzvahs on that day. We can also read about Amalek on that day as well. And that Asiya, says the Maranach, is referring the observance of the Suda, the Purim Suda, and therefore he wants to bring a raya support from Al Gemara that this was observed by the walled cities on Shabbos itself. And so to the Maranach, who was in Yerushalaim, he would make his Purim Suda on Shabbos, not like the Shulchan Aruch rules. The Sefer Eshkol already brought the same question, and he provides an answer to it. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins the halacha like Yerushalmi, not like the practice of the Maharnach. The Magen Avram, in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch of the halachas of Purim, does bring references to the Maharnach, and he writes, but the Radvaz paskins like the Shulchan Aruch, v'chein nirali, and so it appears to me, Sherais Maharnach eina machrichos, the proofs that he brings that suggests that our Talmud argues with Yerushalmi are not definitive, and certainly they do not give us the ability to ignore and go against an explicit ruling in the Yerushalmi. And this is also found in the Shaalos Uteshuvos of the Noid Yehuda, who writes to explain the words of the Rif and the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. Furthermore, on this point, with regards to the Purim Suda on Shabbos. So he adds another discussion, and that is as follows. It's based on a Chidushay HaRitva, also one of the Rishonim. The Chidushay Ritva, Kasav writes, Litchos Malacha Dibi Yerushalmi. He also argues with this Yerushalmi, the Hela Shesudas Purim Nasis B'Shabbos, and like the Maranach, and like the Ra'ah, they understand that the Purim Suda is observed on Shabbos itself in such a kviyus. Nonetheless, the Iker halacha is like the Yerushalmi, as has been pasken by many of the great Rishonim, including the Rif and the Ran. the Orchos Chaim, and as ruled by the Shulchan Aruch and the Radbaz, the Magen Avram, the Vilna Gaon, the Noda B'Yehuda, etc., etc. A whole list of poskim who write that the Suda is, as the Shulchan Aruch rules, not on Shabbos, but rather on Sunday. Similarly, we find that Avnei Nezer, who also writes extensively to defend the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, which is like the Yerushalaim. Now, he then adds something else. He says, "Shegam la'achar shegazu Chazal lahaktim kriyas Megillah erev Shabbos, im yikra Megillah b'Purim shechal b'Shabbos, nihida avra agzeres chachtamim mikol makom mitzvah avad." So he brings an interesting point. This is the Avnei Nezer. So we know that we've already discussed this. Chachamim said we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. The Megillah is read on Thursday night and Friday because of the gezerah that someone may come to carry the Megillah. Nonetheless, the Avnei Nezer writes, if a person read the Megillah on Shabbos of Purim, even though they have gone against this gezerah of the sages not to read the Megillah, nonetheless, they have fulfilled a mitzvah, they have fulfilled their obligation. That is the ruling of the Avnei Nezer. We have a Rabbi Akiva Eger. We mentioned last week that the same reason we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos is the same reason we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos, that someone may come to carry it. Rabbi Akiva Eger writes that if someone did blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah of Shabbos, even though they have gone against the gezerah of the sages, nonetheless they have fulfilled the mitzvah b'di eved. Ulam, says Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef, he argues with this Avnei Nezer and Rabbi Akiva Eger based on a Tosfos in Masechta Sukkah. That Tosfos addresses the Gemara, which says that there is a rabbinic gezerah that a person should not eat with his body in the sukkah and his table inside the house, because maybe while he's eating, he will place his head and most of his body out of the sukkah to eat over his table. And the Gemara there says that someone who did so, loikia mitzvah sukkah miyamav, has not fulfilled the mitzvah sukkah their entire life. Now, the question is as follows. There's a biblical mitzvah of eating a sukkah, and biblically you are yotze. You've only gone against the rabbinic law saying that you shouldn't do this because it's a gezerah, you might eat outside of the sukkah. So if you fulfilled the mitzvah on the biblical level, how could you say that you've never done the mitzvah? So based on this, Tosfos says that the rabbis have the power to be oiker, that if you don't adhere to the rabbinic gezerahs, it's not just that you violated their words, but in fact, they're able to mafkia, they're able to say that you have not even discharged the biblical mitzvah either. Now, the Ran seems to argue with this Tosfos. Nonetheless, in this instance, it's also a little bit different. In this instance, when the rabbis say you don't blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, or read the Megillah, etc., when it's on Shabbos, it's in a way of shev va'al taseh. They're saying, sit back and don't do the mitzvah. Don't do it. And therefore, if you did it, it's as though you have accomplished nothing. And he goes on writing extensively about this idea, and back and forth, whether if one did read the Megillah, they were yotze or not. Another interesting point that he discusses in this footnote is, what about if you have, Cheshek Shlomo writes about a child, a child from a walled city, and the year falls out, the Purim is on Shabbos, Shushan Purim, and on Yudi's birthday is on the 15th of Adar. So on the 14th of Adar, which is when they would read the Megillah according to the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, this boy was not yet bar mitzvah. And on the 15th of Adar, which is Shabbos, which is Shushan Purim, he becomes bar mitzvah. So he says as follows, that this katan, because on the 14th of Adar was not yet a bar mitzvah, and that's when everyone else in Yerushalaim read the Megillah, he should repeat and read the Megillah on Shabbos itself when he is a bar mitzvah. And the reason is that even though this seems to go against the gezerah d'Rabbah that lets the person come to carry the Megillah, nonetheless, in such a case, we are not goizer, there is no gezerah that you might come to carry it. And that is because that this is a unique case, and in a case which is very rare, or when it applies only to a yachid, to an individual, but not to a collective, then we could say that loy gazru, in such an instance, the sages never made their decree. Okay, so let's move on in the tshuva itself. back to the Pnim, and the next part that we're going to discuss is in point number 10 in Ois Yud. Ois Tes. To go back on Amud Reish Samach Tes, Ois Tes, he says as follows. So on Sunday, that's when you make the Purim Suda. What about Mishloach Manos? So he says, B'yom Rishon Tezayin Adar Sholchim Manos Ish L'Re'eu. That is when we do the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos is on in Yerushalaim, will be done on the Sunday. Shtei Manos Ish Echad, and like the halacha says, it's got to be 2 portions of food to one person. And if you send to many of your friends, that's praiseworthy. So even though the Shulchan Aruch rules that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos is observed on Sunday like the Purim Suda, those who do in a place where there is an Eruv give Mishloach Manos on Shabbos as well, they there's a chumrah to do so, a hidur to do so, and they are deserving of blessing. So the question we're going to address is, why is Mishloach Manos observed on the Sunday? The Megillah is read on Thursday night, Friday. Matanas Yonim is given Thursday on Friday. Why is the Mishloach Manos done on Sunday rather than on Friday or Shabbos itself? So the Radbaz in his Tshuva writes that the mitzvah Sudas Purim nitches l'yom rishon, since the Purim Suda is observed on Sunday, like the Yerushalaim that we just discussed, therefore the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos is also observed on the Sunday as well. And why is that? That is based on the Truma Sadesha, one of the Rishonim who writes, he gives a reason for the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos, and that is to ensure that everybody has the food that is necessary to make the Sudas Purim. And that's why we give gifts of food to our friends. And therefore, Mishloach Manos and the Purim Suda go hand in hand together, because Megillah, and he brings a proof from the Gemara itself. And therefore, the Suda is observed on Sunday. The Mishloach Manos is given on Sunday as well, because it's right. The Suda's Purim is in fact on Shabbos, on Sunday. The Mishloach Manos should also be given on both on Shabbos where there is an Eruv, and on Sunday as well. He said as follows, that if we are going to make the Sudas Purim on Shabbos, to be choishes to those Rishonim who say it should be observed on Shabbos, since it doesn't stand out because anywhere on Shabbos we have big meals, they're fully related with the Suda on Shabbos. When it comes to Mishloach Manos on Shabbos, we don't give gifts. There's no Mishloach Manos on a regular Shabbos. So therefore, the Mishloach Manos on Shabbos is clearly recognizable as being for the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos of Purim. So there is no reason to give it again on Sunday. We don't give gifts on Shabbos, and therefore it's very clear that you've been yoyed to the mitzvah. Fine, and the Korban Nesano writes, the Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef, that we could refute these arguments. He then says, Kashali share bevadai bizman chazal lo tiknu Mishloach Manos b'Shabbos, shim kriyas Megillah gazu mishum gezeir derabba shem yavel avirim arba amis b'shus harabim mekol shekei mitzvos Mishloach Manos she'etzek kimu al yidei haitzah. He asks a fundamental question. He says as follows. The whole reason we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos and instead do it on Thursday night, Friday, is because of the Gezeira Rabbah that a person may come to carry. They were worried if someone would come and carry on Shabbos. So therefore, by the same logic, you can't give Mishloach Manos on Shabbos. And the sages would not have established to give Mishloach Manos on Shabbos, because the same concern applies that a person will carry the Mishloach Manos in a place where there's no Eruv and thereby violate Shabbos. And on the contrary, whereas Megillah, which could be read at home theoretically, Mishloach Manos, you need to go out and take it to somebody else. And based on this reason, it should be forbidden on Shabbos. Jumping down furthermore, the Aruch HaShulchan writes that the reason that another reason why we don't give Mishloach Manos on Shabbos is because we don't make a kinyan on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we're not allowed to do business because a person may come to write, and so to any kinyan where there is a transfer of an object from one reshus to another, we don't do that on Shabbos. But says Rabbi Ovadiah Yosef that is not necessarily the case, because if it is L'Tzorech Shabbos, it is allowed. So if it's the mitzvah of the day, you are allowed to give a gift, especially if it's food that will be used at the Purim Suda as well. Now, why don't we do the Mishloach Manos on Friday? So there was the Maria Yash in his Sefer Mata Yehuda writes that maybe the Mishloach Manos should be like Matanos Evyonim, which should be done on Friday. That maybe that should be done. And indeed, the Chazon Ish writes that it's preferable that the Mishloach Manos should be done on Erev Shabbos as well. But this is questionable, because if the time of the mitzvah is not yet arrived, if the mitzvah, like based on the Trumas Hadeshen, is supposed to be observed on the day of the Suda itself, then you're not yotzeh if you give the Mishloach Manos earlier than the appointed time, and therefore la halacha the Mishloach Manos, at least one of them, two portions has to be given on the Sunday itself, which is the day of the Suda. Just to finish off with the last few points, the Yom Rishon Tezayin Ba'ad Yerushalayim Ein Loimer Vido Even Nefilas Apayim. So on the 16th, normally we don't say Tachanun on the 14th or the 15th of Adar. The 14th because that is Purim for us. The 15th is Shushan Purim. Normally in the walled cities they won't say Tachanun on the 14th or the 15th. In this case, where their Purim mitzvahs are being spread out over 3 days, inclusive of the 16th of Adar, which would normally be a regular weekday. But because they're observing the festival meal of Purim on the 16th of Adar, they do not say Tachanun on that day, because it is a Yom Mishta v'Simcha. It's a day of rejoicing and Simcha. Furthermore, those who have the custom that on the day of the yahrzeit of a parent, they will they fast. If that falls out on the 16th in such a kfiyus, you do not fast either. And why is that? Because there is a mitzvah of Sudas Purim. You have to eat on that day. And you don't have to do hataras nadarim for such a thing. And the final halacha, Sudas Purim b'yom rishon ein loimer al anisim b'birchas hamazon. When they make the Purim Suda in Yerushalaim on the 16th, on the Sunday, they do not say al hanisim in benching. Why? Because not Purim, it's only making up for the Suda which they did not observe on Shabbos because of the reasons that we spoke about before. So whilst they're observing the Purim Suda and they're eating the Purim Suda, but Al Anisim is only said on the days of Purim themselves, and therefore not at this meal. However, it would be appropriate to say the Al Anisim in the Harachmans of benching. Purim Suda must be by day, and therefore you cannot do it on Motzei Shabbos. Now, when it comes to Al Anisim, we normally say Al Anisim in benching after the conclusion of the second bracha of the benching. And we know the benching has 3 brachas biblically, and the 4th bracha midrabanan, and one is not allowed to make a hefsek, an interruption in that part of the benching. However, when we get to the harachman, is already past the brachas of benching, and one is technically allowed to interrupt in that case. So the halacha is that Al Anisim is not said in benching in its proper place, and even though there are opinions that maybe one should, la halacha we don't, because that would constitute an unnecessary hefsek in the benching. Nonetheless, in the harachmans where there is no problem of making a hefsek, one can add in a harachman and will say as follows: Harachman yaseh imanu nisim v'niflos. The merciful one should do miracles and wonders for us, just as he did in those days for our ancestors. And then he says the nusach of Bimei Mordechai ve'Esther, which is found in the regular Al Hanisim, and this is also brought in the Kaf HaChaim as well. So, in summary, going day by day in Yerushalaim in a Purim Meshulash on Thursday night and Friday, that is when the Megillah is read, and in the daytime of Friday, that is when Matanas Evyonim is given. There is no Kriyas HaTorah in Yerushalayim on the Friday itself, and they are allowed to do Malacha on that day. On Shabbos, which is the 15th of Adar, they will say Ala Nisim in all of the tefillos and the benching of the day. They take out 2 Sifrei Torah and will read the Maftir of Amalek, and the Haftarah will be the Haftarah of Shabbos Zachor, repeated again, of Pakadati. And they don't say Tachanun, meaning there's no Tzidkascha said at Mincha, and there is no Suda on Shabbos, but it is good to add an extra portion on Shabbos itself. On Sunday, there is no Tachanun, and that is because they're going to have the Purim Suda on that day. The Suda's Purim is done during the daytime of Purim itself. Ala Nisim is not said in davening or in benching, even at the Purim Suda as well. And the Suda's Purim, you could say the Ala Nisim, or should say the Ala Nisim in the Harachmans as well. And Mishloach Manos is observed on the Sunday as well. Just interesting, one thing we didn't discuss about, and we'll talk about it this year tonight, is the mitzvah of drinking on Purim. Chayv inish l'psumei b'Purim. A person is supposed to be intoxicated on Purim. When is that observed? So the Rambam writes that the mitzvah of drinking on Purim is observed in the Purim Suda, meaning it's part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Purim Suda, and therefore that is when one would do so. In Yerushalaim, they would do this on the Sunday. That's generally accepted halacha. There are those who dispute and said that it's nothing to do with the Purim Suda per se. It's a standalone obligation of drinking on the day of Purim itself, which would then imply that in Yerushalaim they should drink on the Shabbos of Purim. And we already mentioned that at least something one should drink as a zeicher, as a remembrance of the miracles. He concludes with the tefillah, just as Hashem did miracles for our ancestors at this time, so too he should do miracles for us and redeem us with the Gula Shlema. And these days of Purim will never cease from the Jewish people. Just to conclude with one final point, when it comes to Shofar and Rosh Hashanah of Shabbos, the Rebbe suggests that when Mashiach comes, we will once again blow the shofar on Shabbos everywhere. And the reason is because in times of Mashiach, we won't need these gezeros, these decrees, the rabbis, lest the person come to do an Aveira. A person may come to carry on Shabbos, since at that time there will be no longer a Yetzer Hara, there will be no more evil negativity in the world, there will be no need for such gezeros, and therefore it's possible that if Mashiach comes before Purim of this year, then the Megillah will be able to be read on Shabbos by the same logic. So that concludes our shir. And again, it's not necessarily relevant for us living here in Chutz Haaretz, but it is a chelik of Torah, and it is a davar chadosh, a davar chidush. It's something unusual about this year, where we see the mitzvahs of Purim are spread out over three days. I happen to have been in Eretz Yisrael on such a kfiyus, and it's actually a beautiful thing that the Purim spirit is extended. And certainly here in Chutz Haaretz, whilst we will say Tachanun on the Sunday, the 16th of Adar, but there is still an idea of Purim Meshulash. The idea of 3 is a chazaka, that we should have a chazaka in the Indian of Nisim B'Niflois, of miracles and salvations for the Jewish people. And that should conclude with the coming of Mashiach immediately now. Okay, well, we'll stop there. Yishar Koyach, and please look out for all of the other shiurim to help us get through the lockdown period and to get ready for Purim. Have a wonderful day.